Since Robbie Wolfe took Frank Fritz's post, something has happened to him. Fans are enraged. Why, therefore, the outcry? Come along with us as we reverse the timeline and reveal Robbie Wolfe's true fate. American Pickers co-host Robbie Wolfe took Frank Fritz's place. For years prior to it, American Pickers was centered around Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz. The attraction of the show was largely attributed to their on-screen chemistry, reciprocal jokes, recollections, and a rhythm developed over many years. The audience did, however, enjoy something else. Robbie frequently appeared on the show. He made sporadic appearances at first, but as Frank's appearances decreased, he gained more attention. A distinct response surfaced when viewers witnessed the fraternal bond on tape. While some saw it as nepotism, others admired it as a continuation of the family. This is when Robbie's issue started. People blamed Robbie for the show's decline in viewership. What role does Robbie play in the American Pickers rating crash? Let's give you some background before we explain how. When veteran co-host Frank Fritz vanished from American Pickers in 2020, it all started. Fans were taken aback. They pondered what had transpired. Since the start of American Pickers, Mike Wolfe had partnered with Frank, and they thought that something was unquestionably wrong because he had vanished in such a manner. Fans, however, hoped Frank would make a comeback that was followed by the gut punch. Frank had no intention of coming back. However, why? And what does Robbie have to do with this? Soon you will see. Fans who had developed an emotional attachment to the pair's relationship for over 10 years were devastated to learn that Frank would not be making a comeback. Frank was much than just a co-host to many viewers. He was the spirit of the show. Indeed, Frank lacked Mike's smoothness and was rough around the edges. However, he had a surprising tenderness and chemistry with Mike that made up for his lack of polish. Frank was the ideal balance to Mike's vigor. Frank's absence was also going to be a huge loss for the viewers. The story initially stated that Frank's health condition forced him to leave. Then there were murmurs. Indeed, Frank experienced health issues. He suffered from a severe back problem that persisted. He had suffered greatly as a result of the years of heavy lifting he had been doing on the program. Before deciding to have surgery, Frank managed the agony for some time. Frank had to deal with a demon while he was recuperating. Frank was administered painkillers to assist him cope with the agony of his recuperation. Mike Wolfe claims that Frank found the painkillers to be too effective. According to Mike, Frank developed an addiction that harmed their relationship. The two gradually drifted apart and hardly spoke to one another. Mike asserted that he wouldn't simply abandon his friend, and he disclosed that he organized an intervention with friends and family to win him back. Frank, however, resisted. He was totally under the influence of the narcotics. Mike claimed that Frank's addiction worsened over time. His ties with others ceased, and his habits changed and worsened. Mike claims that the man that many people adored on film began to disappear behind suffering and withdrawal. Mike claims that because the producers couldn't trust Frank, they had to fire him from the show and replace him with Robbie, Mike's brother. Fans, however, are not at all in agreement with Mike. They have charged him with being Frank's awful pal. They question why Mike didn't bring up Frank's addiction issues until after his passing. He was accused of saying anything to boost the show's ratings, even if it meant making fun of Frank. Because of Mike's treatment of Frank's memory, they even threatened to stop watching the show. Mike and Robbie were under increasing strain. This is the startling part though. Frank does struggle with addiction. So, Mike's statements concerning Frank were true? Frank disclosed his drinking issue to The Sun in July 2021. Frank initially chose to disregard the issue and immerse himself in his work. However, following his back surgery, Frank had a revelation. He aspired to live longer than his mother and had higher expectations for life. His mother passed away from a disease brought on by drinking. His mother wasn't the only family member with an alcohol addiction. So was his granddad. After spending 77 days in an Iowa treatment, Frank managed to stay sober for 11 months before experiencing a brief relapse. His candor won him pity. Fans therefore think that Frank would have discussed his opioid addiction if he had one. Had he, or as Mike said, had his addiction to opioids overcome him? Or was Mike attempting to undermine Frank as a result of the shocking information Frank disclosed? Mike and Frank didn't communicate for 2 years, according to Frank. After the procedure, he said Mike didn't even follow up with him. Is this possible? Is Mike's statement concerning Frank false? But that wasn't Frank's most shocking revelation. Frank discussed the actual cause of his expulsion from the show. Although Frank omitted specifics, it appeared that Mike was uneasy about Frank's rising stardom on American Pickers. There was something about Frank that the audience found irresistible. They admired the work he put into the play and the humor he added. It wasn't just about the money for Frank, the audience thought, and he truly cared about his work on the show. Everything he discovered had a narrative and legend that Frank was familiar with. Additionally, it was an enjoyable learning experience for the audience. Despite Mike being the focus of the presentation, it doesn't appear like he appreciated what Frank said. It seems like Mike had an issue with it when Frank changed his diet and dropped weight. Frank revealed one more shocking revelation. In his opinion, Mike had acted in a way that essentially forced him off the show so Robbie could take his place. Simply put, Frank remarked, "I think Mike wants to get his brother Robbie in there to replace me." The statement reverberated and circulated widely. Many viewers felt betrayed by the notion of a cherished co-host being ignored while a host's family benefited. Mike asserted that this was untrue, and that Frank's addiction, not the real Frank, was speaking. Frank had a serious stroke in July 2022 and never fully recovered. Following that stroke, the vivacious storyteller was admitted to the hospital multiple times. He eventually died on September 30, 2024, at the age of 60. Fans questioned if Frank had received fair treatment when he needed time and compassion after his passing. The intensity of emotion increased. For many fans, Robbie was the object of this emotional concoction of sadness, distrust, and rage. Robbie was under pressure, but Mike also made things worse for Robbie. Mike claimed that after Frank made a remark regarding their friendship, he reached out to him and was able to forgive him. Was Frank telling the truth? Frank's ghost continues to stalk and linger on the program, regardless of the facts. Even now, his humor, wit, and emotional openness are sought for by the audience. He has succeeded in creating a link between the soul and the screen. Fans hold fast to his memory now that he is no longer with them and compare everyone who comes after him to it. Robbie has been engulfed by the enormous shadow that Frank cast. Is Robbie able to escape this shadow? Robbie is seen by many American Picker fans as being out of place on the show. The episodes that Robbie co-hosted and those that featured Frank were viewed by Robbie's detractors. They came to the conclusion that Frank's warmth was crucial to the performance. Robbie, however, strikes them as being simply too formal and businesslike. But that's not the only thing they have to say about Robbie. They think Robbie doesn't care enough and is the result of favoritism. They claim that Robbie lacks Frank's level of antique knowledge. However, what does it mean to know antiques? For Frank, it was a combination of his life experiences, a vast collection of peculiarities, and a demeanor that enabled him to be direct, yet compassionate with vendors. Frank was familiar with item history. Robbie, however, comes from a different background. Robbie has a background in business. He operated a restoration and landscaping company. His picker identity was influenced by his experience. Robbie is frequently seen managing operations, moving inventory, and closing sales. Robbie's technique is interpreted as transactional by fans who appreciated Frank's unique storytelling approach. Additionally, the shortcut becomes more of a dealer and less of a picker in social discourse. Robbie's role as co-host of American Picker has been utterly destroyed by that framing. For him, however, things didn't stop there. Critics claim that Robbie is uninteresting and that whenever he makes a conservative offer, he has unpleasant interactions with customers. He is criticized for being cheap. They even assert that Robbie exerts more pressure on sellers, which they say is the reason the show's ratings have declined. Robbie would constantly serve as a model for them on how to avoid being a picker. Is Robbie being treated fairly? As co-host of American Pickers, Robbie is enjoying his finest life, even though he may not have Frank's storytelling skills. Robbie Wolfe, who grew up in Bettendorf, Iowa, the youngest of 3 children, frequently portrays himself as a restless youngster. He wasn't the best student, and those who saw him as a teenager came to the conclusion that he wouldn't be anything special, much less a TV star. However, Robbie had one thing: a vivid imagination. His mother recognized this and led him to follow his interest and explore. She provided him more than just that. Even though it meant sacrificing herself, she provided him and his brothers with the necessities for a happy existence. Robbie made superb use of his imagination. He saw himself as Huck Finn, exploring obscure regions of America while floating downstream on a raft. The spirit of that explorer would have stayed with him, so he would be like that. His grandfather, William Wolfe, a junker on Chicago's South Side, diverted his attention to collecting junks while his mother allowed his mind to wander. In his yard, his grandfather gathered doors and toilets, among other items. Robbie learned to appreciate everything from him. Robbie learned a valuable lesson. He even went so far as to surprise his grandfather. Robbie gathered and purchased items because they piqued his interest. In contrast to his grandfather, who made purchases with the intention of reselling them, Robbie took his time, even if selling was his ultimate objective. How long it took didn't matter to him. He was going to keep anything he liked. It's good for the person who comes to buy it. Additionally, Robbie enjoys simply observing the time item if no one shows up. Is Robbie really not interested in money? Has he been treated unfairly by his detractors? These questions have an answer. Robbie made the decision to join the junk collecting party. However, Robbie had a strategy. Let's first demonstrate how Robbie purchased a 3,722 square foot home with 4 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms in 2017. He made that acquisition for about $335,000. In terms of business, he paid $80,000 for more than 6 acres of land in 2020. For about $200,000, he purchased a piece of land in Davenport, Iowa, that was next to that property and was once an auto facility. He upgraded the wiring, plumbing, and structural repairs in March 2021, transforming it into a functional storehouse for antique cars and artifacts. Robbie's upgrades cost an astounding $25,655. Robbie keeps vintage cars and large antiques on a 0.14-acre area of ground next to the store. Robbie was merely keeping his shenanigans in reserve. He put them back. He has done work on old trailers, gas stations, motorcycles, neon signs, and vintage autos. He has most likely fixed anything you could think of. The vintages are the focus of his existence. Despite the fact that his detractors claim he looks out of place, it's no wonder he feels so comfortable on American pickers. But perhaps Robbie is just too businesslike. Beauty doesn't really matter to him. Robbie prioritizes object working over flawless cosmetic repair in his restoration methodology. Robbie didn't care if the things he worked on weren't pretty as long as they were functional. According to Robbie, that is a selling feature for serious purchasers. However, there aren't many stories that take that approach. Robbie is living in a story, even though he may not be able to tell one, and he asserts that he understands the importance of narrative. He became aware of this as he grew older. Learning about the histories of individuals, their families, and items became a passion of his. But why didn't he become a better storyteller if he loves stories so much? Or is he superior to what his detractors claim? Robbie implies that picking is his passion and that he hopes to leave a legacy that goes beyond his picking. As a result, he has given advice on how people should be people-oriented. The best picker, he says, is the one who hears what people have to say about their possessions. For Robbie, identifying value is not enough. It involves comprehending tradition, emotion, and memory. Who touched it, how many hands it went through, and the stories woven into its scars are what make a dusty chest priceless, not how much it costs. Critics counter that, unlike Frank, this does not convert into dramatic storytelling in front of the camera. However, Robbie has persisted in giving pickers advice. He chastises pickers who view antiques only as a means of making money. In 2025, Robbie discussed the Rust Belt Americana show and its non-profit division in an interview with Cauville's Antique Trader. Car and vintage enthusiasts get together for the event, which takes place in several states. The money raised goes toward classroom grants and scholarships for instructors and students in blue-collar jobs. According to Robbie, people ought to learn how to give back. Although he believes that his acts set an example, he is not interested in being praised. All he wants is to connect with other spirits and construct bridges. Isn't this a variation of Frank's actions? Robbie says he's always traveling, just like Frank. He hunts barns, meets with dealers, inspects goods, and haggles around 10 days a month. The work involves dealing with inclement weather, malfunctions, missed calls, and stressful negotiations. The camera records images, but it hardly ever records the missed calls or the sleepless nights when he questions whether he overpaid. In addition to all of this, there is weariness, uncertainty, and loneliness. In a year, it seems like he is fighting every mile. Robbie occasionally travels 50,000 miles or more in search of new discoveries. Many fans and critics may perceive the continuous momentum as stiffness or weariness on camera. Imagine appearing on camera while feeling completely worn out. Your facial expressions would reflect that. Is Robbie truly living the life of his dreams if every new discovery is accompanied by a worn-out body and an uncertain schedule? Robbie works hard even during filming. He feels that attempting to document his discoveries makes his job more challenging. As he delved through basements, garages, and barns, the cameras would follow him. It took him 12 hours instead of the customary 6. Even with these extended hours, 42 minutes of television is still insufficient. They must film for 300 hours in temperatures of 100 degrees. They occasionally have to shoot 6 separate scenes, each involving a different set of actors. At times, he didn't even want to be followed by the cameras, but that's the life he chose. Is Robbie truly living his dream once more? Cameras aren't. Robbie continues to be in contact with his friends. He buys from them, and they buy from him. Does Robbie recognize the importance of maintaining bonds? He claims that their group has bonded and even treats themselves as a family. They have had a cameraman and a sound man from the first season. Even after more than 24 seasons, it doesn't appear that they will be leaving anytime soon. Frank is the only significant individual who appears to have left them. However, even his absence feels eerie. Robbie intends to stay on the show for a number of years, even if it means occasionally taking on his brother. They both have a tendency to be obstinate. Robbie gets what he wants sometimes. Mike gets what he wants in other situations. Ultimately, they strive to put aside their disagreements and create the greatest TV program possible. Robbie is having a great time, and the items he discovers seem to make the tension worthwhile. The discovery of a 1941 Indian motorcycle in the basement of a 2-bedroom Michigan home is one of Robbie's favorite discoveries that makes the demanding life of selecting worthwhile. A 1-2 Air Force pilot owned the property, and his daughter hadn't been to the basement in 10 years. The pilot had built a plane there. Robbie looked around and discovered the fuselage of a small plane, a motorcycle, and various pieces. To get the airplane out, the rear wall of the home had to be taken down. The story was worth more in that moment than the item. As she described flights, family dinners, bereavement, and recollections of the war, the pilot's daughter broke down in tears. Robbie claims that this type of selection, in which the artifact and the story are inextricably linked, is his favorite. Robbie has a passion for motorcycles. He doesn't just view motorcycles as machinery, he meets them as if they were old friends. He purchases motorcycles in order to hear the whispers of lives and histories. Simply put, he is unable to share the stories he hears.